Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to get straight to the insights you need, cutting through all the noise. And today, we're unpacking a really, a head-spinning development. There's a planned meeting, August 15th, between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. In Alaska, of all places. Just think about that. A few months back, it was all strict warnings, new punishments coming from the U.S. Now, a potential warm-up. It's a huge shift, almost baffling.
It really is. And what's so fascinating, I think, is just how fast that geopolitical chessboard can change shape, often because of things happening, beneath the surface. So our mission in this deep dive, using your recent notes, articles, research, is to pull out the key bits of knowledge. We want to help you get a quick handle on the power dynamics, the shifting leverage, who's got what cards, and explore the likely outcomes. It's about getting you informed fast.
Okay, let's unpack this then, because it does feel like Trump, who was very publicly pushing sanctions not long ago, now seems to be the one reaching out. It's a complete U-turn from those orders and warnings in June and July. So the big question is, what happened? What shifted the power balance? Who's really holding the cards going into this Alaska meeting?
It's a great question. Because if you zoom out a bit, you see how these perceived shifts in power economic alliances, even if they're just temporary, they can really change a leader's negotiating stance dramatically. What's really striking here is Putin. He's coming to this meeting from a much stronger position than he was in, say, the spring. Back then, Trump's peace efforts looked more like his own thing, right? And the war party in the West, they still had momentum. You had Senator Graham pushing his punishment plan, more U.S. weapons going to Ukraine, even Macron and Starmer floating ideas about sending Western troops.
Right, that paints a very different backdrop. So what specifically made Trump go back to Putin now? Our sources seem to point to a couple of key things changing on Trump's side. First, that oil block strategy. Sounds like it flopped. He was banking on hitting Russia's oil money hard, but it didn't really work out that way.
Exactly. The attempt to block their exports didn't hurt revenues nearly as much as they hoped. But then there's this other thing. The perception, maybe a carefully crafted one, that Putin has solid backing from the BRICS group. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And interestingly, Trump's own actions, constantly questioning old alliances, might have actually helped create this idea of a strong alternative bloc. Now, whether that group is really cohesive or if it can last, that's a whole other question. But right now, that perception definitely weakens Trump's ability to apply pressure. It just does.
That's fascinating, how perception itself becomes a tool in these high-stakes games. Okay, but let's pivot to the battlefield itself. The sources there sound pretty stark. You're saying Ukraine is basically holding on by a thread, and even their biggest supporters are starting to admit it. How does that feed into the pressure on Trump?
Oh, the battlefield realities are. Yeah, they're grim. If you look back at February, March, the lines were mostly frozen. Ukrainian troops were holding ground, even pushing into Russia's Kursk area a bit. Kiev was talking up its drone wall plan, remember? Supposedly unbreakable. But since then, Ukraine's taken significant losses, especially in that Kursk border zone. The summer fighting has gone Russia's way much more clearly than it did last year. And that drone wall turned out to be much weaker than they claimed.
So much for unbreakable, huh? Always seems to be a catch. It sounds incredibly tough. Are the sources saying how they're still holding out? Or is it just sheer determination? And what are we seeing from the West? Are they acknowledging this decline?
It really makes you think about the limits of just sending weapons, When the internal capacity is fading, the stark thing is even the most pro-Ukraine experts in the West are basically saying now, we don't get how they're still holding out. Which points to a really profound shift in the calculation for everyone involved. It suggests that no amount of weapons deliveries can actually reverse the trend on the ground. Best case, they slow it down. And that is why even the traditional war party figures in the West, and in Kiev too, they've suddenly picked up Trump's earlier idea for a ceasefire. Quite quickly, actually.
So this isn't Trump suddenly seeing the light on peace, necessarily. It's more that the grim reality on the ground is forcing his hand.
Precisely. Trump needs these talks with Putin now, not because he's suddenly become a pacifist, but because the actual situation, the battlefield facts are pushing him there. There's this general feeling now that nobody really knows how much longer the Ukrainian army can hold out. So from Trump's point of view, the quicker he gets some kind of deal with Moscow, the better it looks for him politically. And that rush, that urgency from Trump, that's another plus for Putin. If the talks break down, what does he lose? Nothing, really. His forces can just keep advancing.
That's a powerful position for Moscow to be in strategically. But okay, even with things looking dire on the battlefield, Kiev isn't giving in on core demands. You mentioned Zelensky's stance. And Europe seems to be supporting that defiance. So what does that mean for Trump actually getting a deal done? And surely Russia has weak spots too. Our notes mention the economy.
You're right. Russia definitely has vulnerabilities. And the biggest is still the economy. Even without the oil bloc fully working, the rising ruble has caused problems for their budget. A big gap. By the end of July, the shortfall was, what, 4.9 trillion rubles, about $61.4 billion. That's 1.1 trillion rubles more than they planned for the whole year.
Wow, that sounds significant. So it's not all smooth sailing for Putin economically.
It's not, but you have to put it in context. The research we're seeing suggests Russia's financial cushion, their reserves, are pretty solid. Solid enough they can probably handle gaps like this for years without, crippling the wider economy. But this brings up a huge challenge for any deal Trump and Putin might make. Whatever they agree on, it's going to be Trump's job to make sure Ukraine and Europe actually go along with it. And that's exactly where things fell apart last time, isn't it? Even if the leaders had a basic agreement sketched out, European hardliners in Kiev managed to sink it. And what's really interesting now is that Zelensky and the big three in Europe, Macron, Starmer, Germany's Merz, they look like they're trying to do it again.
Right, Zelensky's been very clear on that point, hasn't he? I remember him saying Ukraine will not give Russia any prizes and won't hand their land to the invader. Pretty direct.
Absolutely unequivocal. And the analysis in our sources predicts that even if Ukrainian forces are pushed to the brink, even if the line is close to collapse, don't expect Sursky, the commander, or Zelensky to just surrender. What's seen as much more likely is that with European backing, they'll fight it out to a bitter end, maybe partly to pin the blame for the mess on Putin, and maybe to hand Trump his own kind of Afghanistan-like failure. It just shows how deep those political goals run, even when the military reality is shifting under their feet.
So after all that, what does this actually mean for the Alaska Peace Summit itself? It really is starting to sound like maybe more show than substance, especially if Kiev won't budge and Europe's backing them. What's the biggest takeaway for us if these talks actually happen?
Well, broadly, I think it shows how these peace deals, in really messy conflicts, they often have multiple agendas, sometimes conflicting ones. It really makes you ask, are these summits about actually ending the conflict? Or are they just about managing the ongoing strategic game? The consensus from the sources is pretty clear. Sorting out all these issues in one meeting, nearly impossible. So the most likely result, if Putin and Trump do meet, it's probably, well, a bunch of big splashy statements. Pledges that sound good but are ultimately meaningless.
So enough for Trump to say he did something. Check the peacemaker box, maybe.
Yeah.
But something that fades fast. You mentioned the first Minsk deal. Like that.
Exactly like that. Enough for Trump to claim a win for his record, then forgotten almost immediately. The comparison to Minsk 1 is really quite fitting, I think. That was signed in fall 2014, right? And it just led to 6 more months of heavy fighting, which ended with Ukraine losing badly at Debaltseve. And that paved the way for Minsk 2, which was an agreement that basically just froze the conflict more or less for the next few years. Didn't solve it.
Well, this has been incredibly helpful, really peeling back the layers on these unexpected talks. We've seen this complex web, the shifting power, Ukraine's really tough but defiant spot, Russia's own issues, though maybe manageable, and just how unlikely a real resolution is from this one Alaska summit. Understanding these layers hopefully helps you see past the headlines, really grasp what's motivating everyone involved, what their constraints are.
Exactly. And maybe something to think about, building on this. If we look at that historical pattern, these meaningless pledges, agreements like Minsk 1 that often lead to more fighting, not less, what new ways, what new metrics should we, as people trying to stay informed, use to actually judge if these high-stakes peace talks are truly successful or just political theater? Something to chew on.